My wife spent 8 months planning to take half of everything I own, and she did it at my own dining room table, with a man I was paying to manage my money. She thought I had stopped paying attention. That was the whole plan, really. Get the old man comfortable, get him to sign where the little tab says sign, and let her financial advisor handle the rest. What she did not understand, sitting there with her wine and her paperwork, is that I built every dollar she was trying to divide, one building at a time, starting before she knew my name. And a man who counts every dollar on the way up does not suddenly stop counting on the way down. He just gets quiet about it. So I let them keep planning. For 8 months I smiled, and I nodded, and I let them think they were running the table. And the whole time, I was the one holding the cards they did not even know were in the deck. My name is Gordon Marsh. I am 65 years old. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, in a house with a view of the McDowell Mountains that I paid cash for in 2001. I made my money in real estate, the slow way, the unglamorous way, buying small and holding long for 40 years. If you are watching this tonight, somewhere out there with your own quiet to keep, I would guess you already know the kind of man I'm describing. The one who handles things. The one nobody worries about, because he has never once given them a reason to. Stay with me, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from, because the part that matters comes later, and I want you there when it lands. Let me start where it really starts, which is a long way before the betrayal. Because you cannot understand what they tried to take until you understand what it cost to build. I bought my first building in 1984, a fourplex on Cypress Street in Tempe, ugly as sin, with a cracked slab and tenants who hadn't paid in 2 months. I was 23. I had saved $4,000 working construction, and I borrowed the rest from a banker who I think felt sorry for me. The day I closed, the seller handed me a brass key to the main door, and I put it on my keychain. And it has been on my keychain every day for 41 years. I still have it. You'll hear about that key again. I did the slow way on purpose, because the slow way was the only way I trusted. I fixed that first fourplex myself, evenings and weekends, with my own hands and a borrowed truck, while I worked construction all day to make the note. Then I refinanced it and bought a duplex, then a small strip of 4 storefronts that everybody told me was a mistake. For the first 15 years, I drove cars with 200,000 miles on them, and I ate a lot of meals standing over the sink, while men I'd started out with were flipping fast and getting rich on paper, and then getting wiped out when the market turned. I just kept buying small, paying down, and holding. I learned the one rule that has never once failed me in 40 years, which is that the man who knows exactly what he owns, down to the dollar and the deed, cannot be beaten. Because everyone else in the room is guessing, and he is not. By the time I was 50, I owned over 400 units across the valley, held free and mostly clear, through a company I built with my own name on it. Nobody handed me a thing. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters a great deal when you hear what my wife decided was hers to take. The company that grew out of all that buying had a name on the door, Marsh Property Group. And it was mine before I ever met Lynn. Write that down. It matters more than anything else I'm going to tell you. My first marriage ended young and quiet. No children, no drama. Just 2 people who married too early and grew in different directions. I spent my 30s and 40s married to the work. I was not lonely, exactly. I was just busy in a way that looked like contentment from the outside. I met Lynn in 2003 at a charity thing I almost didn't go to. She was bright and warm, and she laughed at the dry things I said that most people didn't catch. We married in 2004. I was 44. She was 33. And here is the thing I did. The thing that is going to matter at the end, so listen. Before we married, I sat Lynn down with my lawyer, a sharp old desert rat named Howard Stein, and we signed a prenuptial agreement. It was not romantic, I told her so. I told her I had spent 20 years building something out of nothing, and that what I built before her would stay separate. and that everything we made together after the wedding, we would share fairly, 50-50. No argument. She said she understood. She said she loved me, not the buildings. She signed it. Howard put it in a file, and the file went in a drawer, and for 20 years nobody looked at it again. For a long time, we were good. I want to be fair to her and say that we traveled, we were kind to each other. I gave her a life of real comfort, and I never once made her feel that the comfort was a leash. If you had asked me 4 years ago whether my marriage was solid, I'd have said yes without thinking. Then the advisor showed up. His name was Marcus Vale. Lynn met him at a wellness retreat in Sedona, one of those weekends she'd started taking with her friends. He ran a small wealth management firm, Vale Capital. Very polished, very modern. The kind of man who wears an expensive watch and calls everyone by their first name within 10 seconds of meeting them. He was 43, and he had a way of making you feel, when he talked to you, like you were the only smart person in the room. Lynn thought he was wonderful. She started saying his name a lot. Marcus says we should rebalance. Marcus says the market's shifting. Marcus thinks you work too hard. Gordon, you should let someone take some of this off your plate. And here is where I made my one real mistake. And I'll own it. Because I'm not going to tell you a story where I'm perfect. I let him in, not all the way. But I was 61, and I was tired. And a part of me liked the idea of handing some of the day-to-day money management to someone, so Lynn would stop worrying that I'd drop dead at my desk. So I gave Marcus access to manage the liquid accounts, the cash, the brokerage, the operating funds that ran through the business month to month. Not the holdings themselves, not the deeds, just the money that moved. I told myself it was delegation. I told myself I'd earned a little rest. What I had actually done was hand a stranger a window into my finances and a reason to be in my house. For about a year, nothing seemed wrong. Then small things started to itch. The first was Rosa. Rosa Delgado has kept the books for Marsh Property Group for almost 30 years. She started as a part-time bookkeeper when we had 40 units, and she is now the controller of the whole operation. And she is the most honest human being I have ever known. The kind of person who will drive back to a store because they undercharged her $1. Rosa called me one evening, at home, and her voice was careful in a way I'd learned to pay attention to over 3 decades. She said, "Mr. Marsh, I don't want to step where I shouldn't, but there are some advisory fees going out to Vale Capital, and the math is strange. They don't track to any service I can find. And there are 3 of them this quarter to a consulting entity I've never heard of. And that entity shares a mailing address with Mr. Vale's firm." I told Rosa to keep a record, quietly, just for me. I told her not to mention it to anyone, and especially not to Lynn. Rosa said, "Of course, Mr. Marsh." And then she said one more thing before she hung up that I have not forgotten. She said, "I have watched you build this for 30 years. I am not going to watch somebody walk off with it on my shift. Remember her. She is going to matter more than anyone in this story except me." I should tell you why I trusted Rosa with this when I trusted no one else. Because it's the same reason the whole thing turned out the way it did. 30 years ago, when Marsh Property Group was 40 units and a card table, I hired a young single mother as a part-time bookkeeper because nobody else would give her a chance. And within a year, I understood I'd accidentally hired the most honest mind I'd ever worked beside. She caught her own mistakes and reported them before I ever could. She drove back to a hardware store once over $1 they'd undercharged her. I made her controller of the whole operation, and in 3 decades, she never once gave me a reason to check her work, which is the highest thing I can say about a human being. So when Rosa told me the math was strange, I didn't hope she was wrong. I knew she wasn't. Rosa Delgado does not bring you a number she isn't sure of. That was the first crack of daylight, and a man like Marcus never saw her coming. Because men like Marcus do not notice the quiet, decent people who keep the books. They only ever watch the money. After that, I started paying attention again. Real attention. The kind I'd built my whole life on and had let go slack for exactly long enough to get hurt. What I found, piece by piece over the next 2 months, was a machine. Marcus was moving money. Not stealing it outright, nothing that crude. He was funneling it. Marital cash. The money Lynn and I had built together over 20 years and that we'd split 50-50 in any honest divorce, was bleeding out through fake advisory fees and phony consulting invoices into entities Marcus controlled. Slowly. A little every month, so no single line would scream. The plan, once I saw the shape of it, was almost elegant. Drain the shared accounts down to a trickle. Park that money where Marcus could hold it. Then, when the divorce came, the marital estate would look small and sad. Lynn would play the wronged wife who'd been kept in the dark about the finances by her controlling husband. And the money she was really walking away with would be sitting safe in Marcus's accounts, waiting for the two of them. Because by then I had also worked out the other thing, the thing I'd been slow to let myself see. Lynn and Marcus were not just business. The retreats, the late calls, the way she said his name. My wife was leaving me for the man she'd hired to rob me, and the two of them were going to use my own money to fund the exit. I want to tell you what that night was like. The night I finally let myself know all of it at once. Because I don't want you to think I'm made of stone. I sat alone in my office, the one room in that big house that was only ever mine. And I held that brass key from the Cypress Street building in my hand, and I turned it over and over until the metal got warm. I thought about the 23-year-old who fixed a cracked slab on his knees because he couldn't afford to pay anyone else. I thought about how that kid would feel, knowing that the woman he'd one day give a beautiful life to was, at that very moment, downstairs at his dining table, helping a stranger carve him up. I didn't cry. I'm not built for that. But I sat there a long time, and when I finally stood up, the grief was gone, and what was left was the thing that has never once let me down in 40 years. The counting. The cold, patient counting. Because here is what Lynn and Marcus, for all their planning, had never bothered to check. They were fighting over the marital estate, the money we'd made together, which after Marcus's funneling didn't look like much. But the marital estate was a puddle next to the ocean. The real wealth, the 400 units, the company, the land, all of it was separate property, built before the marriage, protected by a prenuptial agreement my wife had signed 20 years earlier, with her own hand and apparently forgotten existed. Marcus had a window into the cash that moved. He had never once seen the structure underneath it, because I had never given him the deeds, only the checkbook. He thought the checkbook was the empire. The checkbook was the tip jar. So I made my decision. Sitting in that office with the warm key in my hand, I was not going to confront them. I was not going to rage or beg or throw anyone out. I was going to let them keep planning. I was going to be the comfortable, checked-out old man they needed me to be, for exactly as long as it took them to commit the whole scheme to paper and to recordings. And then I was going to walk into a room and set it all down on the table at once. I called Howard Stein the next morning. Howard is 73 now and semi-retired, but when I told him what was happening, he got very quiet. And then he said, "Gordon, do you still have your copy of the prenup?" I said I did. He said, "Then they have already lost. They just have not been informed yet. Let's make sure that when they are, it's airtight." The first thing Howard told me was that Arizona is a one-party consent state. If I am part of a conversation, I can record it. He confirmed it twice, in writing, because I do not do anything important on a handshake. So I started carrying my phone differently. I left it on the counter during their dinners. I let it sit on the desk during the meetings Marcus started scheduling at my house. The ones where he'd walk me through simplifying my affairs. And I let them talk. They talked plenty, Marcus, in my own living room, explaining to Lynn that the key was to keep the operating accounts drawn down before any filing so the disclosed estate stayed small. Lynn, in my kitchen, saying she just needed him to be patient a few more months, that Gordon trusted Marcus completely now and would sign whatever Marcus put in front of him. They talked about me the way you'd talk about a house you were getting ready to sell, what a coat of paint would do, how much they could get. I poured the wine those nights. I asked Marcus how his quarter was going. I played my part so well that I started to frighten myself a little. There was one night, in the middle of all of it, when I thought Lynn might stop. It was late, and she found me out on the back patio looking at the mountains, and she sat down next to me without a word, the way she used to before any of this began. We sat there a while. Then she said my name, just Gordon, like a question with no sentence behind it. I turned and looked at her, and for a moment her face was the face I married, open and unsure. And I understood that some part of her was standing right at the edge of telling me everything. I could have helped her over that edge. I could have said, "Lynn, whatever it is, talk to me. We can fix it." But I had heard the recordings by then, and there was a part of me that needed to know which woman was going to win the war going on inside her. She looked at me a moment longer. Then whatever it was closed back over her face, and she said it was nothing. She was just tired, and she went inside. She chose Marcus that night, on the patio, without either of us ever saying his name. I have wondered since what might have happened if I'd reached over and taken her hand. I have decided not to wonder about it too hard. She knew the road she was on. She walked it with her eyes open. The second thing I did was harder, and it took longer. I had Rosa quietly assemble the parallel record. Every funneled fee, every phantom consulting invoice, every dollar traced from our marital accounts into Marcus's entities, dated and sourced and cross-referenced against the bank records. It took her 6 weeks of nights. She built me a ledger that told the whole story in numbers that could not be argued with. The kind of documentation that does not raise its voice because it does not have to. And then there was the part where I almost lost it all. And I'm going to tell you that part straight, because it's the part where being careful saved me from being clever. Marcus brought me a stack of documents one afternoon. Estate consolidation, he called it. A restructuring of my holdings into a new revocable trust, framed entirely as protecting Lynn, making sure she'd be taken care of, simplifying everything so probate would be clean if anything happened to me. He was warm about it. He sat across my own kitchen table with his sleeves rolled up like a man doing me a favor on a Saturday, and he had little colored tabs marking every signature line. The yellow ones flagged, "Sign here, sign here, sign here." Lynn sat next to me with her hand on my arm, her thumb moving on my sleeve the way it used to mean something, telling me how much peace of mind this would give her, how she worried about me, how she just wanted us taken care of. And I want to be honest with you, because I almost did it. I had the pen in my hand. It was a thick stack, 40-some pages of dense legal language, and I was 65 and tired. And these were the two people I had trusted most in the world. And the whole document was engineered, expertly, by a man who does this for a living, to be signed and not read. My hand was on the first yellow tab. I could feel both of them waiting. But 40 years of never signing what I haven't read does not switch off because my hand is tired, and the people smiling at me are people I love. So I set the pen down. I told them I never sign anything the same day I'm handed it. An old rule. Nothing personal, just how I've always done business. And I'd have it back to them within the week. Lynn's thumb stopped moving on my sleeve. Marcus's warm smile flickered, just for half a second, before he caught it and told me, of course, take all the time I needed. That was smart. But I'd been reading faces across closing tables for 40 years, and I saw the thing that crossed his before he buried it. And it was not patience, it was fear. That night I sat at my desk and read all 43 pages with Howard on the phone, line by line, out loud. And buried on page 31, in language soft enough to slide right past a tired man, was a transfer. The documents didn't just create a trust, They quietly moved my separate property, the protected holdings, the entire ocean, into a jointly held marital structure. One signature, on one yellow tab, would have undone the prenup I signed in 2004. One signature would have handed them the empire they did not even know they hadn't taken yet. I sat with that for a while. They hadn't just been trying to take the marital half. They'd been trying to take everything. And they'd nearly gotten my own hand to do it. I'll be honest. That was the moment the last of anything soft in me toward the two of them went quiet for good. I did not sign it. I had Howard prepare a clean version that did exactly what Marcus claimed his version did, and nothing more. And I signed that one instead. And I handed it back with a pleasant word about how thorough Marcus was. He took it without reading it closely. People who run cons rarely check whether they've been conned. He thought he'd won. He filed my clean, harmless document away and told Lynn it was done. 3 weeks later, Lynn filed for divorce. She did it the way they'd planned. The wronged wife, kept from the finances, asking the court for an equitable share of a marital estate that, on paper, Marcus had drained down to almost nothing. The strategy assumed I'd be confused, isolated, and slow. It assumed I'd fight over the puddle and never know about the ocean. The reckoning happened in a mediation, in a glass conference room in a law office in Phoenix, on a Thursday morning in spring. Lynn was there with her attorney, a confident woman who clearly believed her client was the underdog. Marcus came too, listed as Lynn's financial advisor, there to explain the estate. He wore the watch. And I sat next to Howard Stein, an old man in a grey suit who had been waiting 20 years for somebody to be foolish enough to forget that prenup existed. Lynn's attorney opened strong. She painted the picture they'd built: a controlling husband, a wife shut out of the money, a modest marital estate, and a request for half of it, plus support. Marcus walked everyone through the numbers, the small, sad numbers he himself had engineered. It was a good performance. Lynn wouldn't look at me. Then Howard asked if he could respond, and he did it the way I'd asked him to. People first, numbers second. He called on Rosa. Rosa Delgado had driven up from Tempe in her good blouse, and she sat at that glass table with a binder she'd spent 6 weeks building, and she did not perform. Because Rosa has never performed anything in her life. She just told the truth in order. She explained, in the flat, steady voice of a woman who has reconciled 30 years of accounts to the penny, exactly where the money had gone. She walked them through each advisory fee that matched no service, each consulting invoice to an entity that shared Marcus's address, each dollar traced out of the marital accounts and into accounts Marcus controlled. She had the bank records clipped to every claim, tabbed and cross-referenced, the kind of work that does not raise its voice because it does not have to. When Lynn's attorney tried to wave off a figure as a misunderstanding, Rosa didn't argue. She just turned to the exact tab and slid the source document across the table and waited. And the attorney looked at it and stopped asking. She did that twice. After the second time, the attorney quit trying. I watched Marcus's face the whole way through Rosa's testimony. And somewhere in the middle of it, the expensive watch on his wrist stopped being a thing he was proud of and started being a thing he kept turning, around and around, like a man checking how much time he had left. When Rosa was done, Howard set down 3 more things, one at a time, and he let the silence sit between them. The first was the prenuptial agreement, signed by Lynn in 2004, establishing that the entire core of my wealth was separate property and had never been part of the marriage to divide. He slid it down the table and let her attorney read the date and the signature herself, out loud if she wanted. I watched the attorney get to the signature line, and I watched her go very still, because she understood in that instant that her own client had walked into her office and never once mentioned the single document that erased the entire case. She set it down the way you set down something hot. The second was the recording. One-party consent, Arizona, Howard noted, with the citation, and then he pressed play. In that quiet glass room, Marcus's own voice came out of a small speaker, explaining how to draw the accounts down before any filing, so the estate would photograph small and sad. Then Lynn's voice, clear as a bell, saying Gordon would sign whatever Marcus put in front of him. Howard did not play very much. He did not need to. He pressed stop, and the only sound in the room was that watch turning on Marcus's wrist. And then he set down the last thing, and this was the one that changed the temperature in the room from a divorce into something far more dangerous for them. He explained, calmly, that moving marital assets out of reach in anticipation of a divorce is called fraudulent conveyance, and that it is not a strategy, it is a crime, and that everything Rosa had just documented and Marcus had just been recorded describing was evidence of it. He noted that Marcus, as a licensed advisor, had regulatory obligations he had rather spectacularly violated, and that the same pattern, once a regulator started pulling threads, rarely turned out to involve only one client. Lynn's attorney asked for a recess. She did not get the dignity of finishing the sentence before Lynn stood up. And here is the part I think about most, even now, because Lynn stood up, and she finally looked at me, across that glass table, for the first time all morning. And it was not anger on her face, and it was not even fear, exactly. It was the look of a person who has just understood that the man she spent 8 months believing was a comfortable, checked-out old fool had been sitting across from her at the dinner table the whole time, fully awake, watching her plan his ruin and saying nothing. For just a second, before her attorney pulled her into the hallway, something crossed her face that I can only call shame. Not the shame of being caught, the other kind, the kind that knows exactly what it traded, and what it was worth, and what it threw away. She had loved me once. I do believe that. She'd just decided, somewhere along the way, that a man who never raises his voice must not be paying attention, and she'd bet her whole life on it. I did not feel triumph looking at her. I felt the particular tiredness of a man who has just watched someone he once trusted lose everything that mattered for a reason that was never good enough. Then they were in the hallway, and Howard leaned over to me, and he said, "Gordon, you understand what we have here. We can refer Vale to the Corporation Commission and the State Bar referral, and very possibly the county attorney. We can pursue Lynn for the fraud directly. We can leave the two of them with nothing and a stack of legal problems that will follow them for years. Say the word and I make the calls this afternoon." And this is the last move. Not the reveal. The reveal was just where it became visible. The move was what I did next. I told Howard no. I told him I wanted 3 things, and not one thing more. I wanted the prenup honored, which meant my separate property, the company, the buildings, the land, the work of 40 years, stayed mine, untouched, the end. I wanted the marital estate, the money Lynn and I had actually built together, reconstituted to what it should have been before Marcus drained it, and then split fairly, the honest 50-50 I'd promised her at that table in 2004. Because I am a man who keeps the deal he signed, even when the other person tried to burn it. And I wanted the documentation, Rosa's binder, the recordings, all of it, placed in a sealed file in Howard's office and left there, not sent to a regulator, not handed to a prosecutor, just kept. Because here is the thing, and it's the only thing in this whole business I did purely for myself. Marcus and Lynn had tried to win by ruining me, by using leverage to break a man and take what was his. And I had spent that whole morning proving I had more leverage than they ever dreamed of. I could have ended Marcus's career and put Lynn in real legal danger with 3 phone calls, and I'd have been within my rights. But destroying people because you finally got the power to is exactly the thing they tried to do to me. And I was not going to climb down into that hole just because I'd won the right to. The file stays in the drawer. They both know it's there. That is enough. That is more than enough. A man who needs to watch his enemies burn never really won anything. He just changed seats with them. Lynn signed the settlement 2 weeks later. She took her fair half of the marital estate, which was a great deal more than the puddle Marcus had left her, and a great deal less than the empire she'd reached for. Marcus returned the funneled money rather than explain to a regulator where it had gone, which was the entire point of letting him know the file existed. Last I heard, Vale Capital had quietly lost most of its clients, the way firms do when word gets around, without anyone ever having to file a thing. Lynn and Marcus did not last 6 months, once the money they'd schemed for turned out to be ordinary. Greed makes a poor foundation. It cannot hold weight. That was a year ago. I am 65 years old, and I live alone now in the house with the mountain view. And I will tell you honestly that some mornings the quiet is heavy. I won't pretend it isn't. But it is an honest quiet, and I have learned the difference between an honest quiet and the other kind. The kind where someone is sitting across from you, smiling and counting your money in their head. A few months after it was all done, I drove down to Tempe, to Cypress Street, to the ugly fourplex where the whole thing started in 1984. Somebody else owns it now. The slab's been redone. But I sat in my car across the street for a while with that brass key in my hand, the one that's been on my keychain for 41 years. And I turned it over until the metal got warm, the way I do. And I thought, you cannot take this from a man. Not really. You can come for his money and his marriage and his trust, and you can take all of it. And it still won't be the thing that mattered. The thing that mattered was never the buildings. It was the man who learned, on his knees on a cracked slab at 23, to know exactly what he was holding. They never understood that they were never going to beat that man. They were only ever playing against the checkbook. They never even met the one who built it. So that's my story. Here is the only piece of it I'd ask you to keep. Wherever you are tonight, people will mistake your silence for absence. They'll mistake your patience for weakness, and your calm for a man who isn't watching. Let them. A quiet man who knows exactly what he owns and exactly what he signed cannot be robbed, only underestimated. And being underestimated, it turns out, is not the weak position. It's the strongest seat at the table. It's just the one nobody's afraid of, right up until the morning he sets the file down. If someone ever mistook your patience for weakness and learned, too late, that it was something else, tell me about it down in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read them. If this story was worth your time, subscribe and keep your own counsel. And keep counting. The quiet ones are the ones still standing when the noise dies down.